Right now, you're wearing something. Even if it's just one thin layer, you probably haven't gone a single day this year without covering some part of your body. You do it automatically, without thinking, the same way you breathe. But the reason you do it isn't the reason you probably assume. And the real story behind it starts long before anyone had a mirror, a market, or a single reason to feel ashamed of their own skin. Because covering the body is older than farming, older than cities, and older than the very idea of modesty itself. For most of the time humans have existed, there was no one around to judge how you looked. And yet the covering started anyway, tens of thousands of years before anyone had a word for clothing. In 2010, a team of biologists led by researcher David Reed used a strange source of evidence to answer a question archaeology couldn't: DNA from lice. Head lice have lived on human hair for millions of years, but at some point a separate branch split off, a new lineage that could only survive in the folds of fabric pressed against skin, not in hair. By measuring how much that branch had genetically drifted from its ancestor, researchers calculated it split off somewhere between 170,000 and 190,000 years ago. That number matters enormously because it means humans were wearing something consistently enough for an entirely new species of parasite to evolve around it, roughly 165,000 years before anyone invented writing, and long before a single scrap of actual ancient clothing survived for us to dig up. So the question is, if the DNA says clothing existed that early, why does the physical evidence only start showing up so much later? Let's go looking for it. In 2021, researchers excavating Contrabandier's Cave on the Atlantic coast of Morocco uncovered something unexpected. Among roughly 12,000 bone fragments, they found more than 60 tools, shaped and smoothed from animal bone, dated to between 120,000 and 90,000 years ago. When archaeologist Emily Hallett examined the wear patterns, she found they matched exactly what you'd expect from scraping hides clean, the same motion still used to prepare leather and fur today. Even more telling, the carnivore bones found nearby showed cut marks consistent with skinning for pelts, not for meat. This is currently the oldest known direct evidence of clothing production anywhere on Earth. Here's why that matters. Morocco, 100,000 years ago, wasn't some brutal frozen wasteland. Researchers described the climate around Contrabandier's Cave at the time as relatively mild, not dramatically different from the region today, which raises an obvious problem. If these people weren't desperately fighting off deadly cold, why go to all the trouble of skinning animals and scraping hides into fur and leather? The answer sitting right next to those bone tools might explain it. In the same broad window of time and region, archaeologists have found some of the earliest known personal ornaments in the human story, deliberately pierced and shaped shell beads, clearly made to be worn, not eaten or used as tools. Covering the body, it turns out, wasn't happening in isolation. It was showing up at the exact same moment humans started decorating themselves on purpose. So which came first, the practical need to cover up or the desire to be seen a certain way? There's another site that pushes this even further back. At Blombos Cave on the southern coast of South Africa, archaeologists have found processed pieces of ochre, a reddish mineral pigment dating to around 100,000 years ago, along with a deliberately engineered mixing kit. An abalone shell used like a paint pot, containing a ground-up ochre compound ready to be applied to something. Researchers believe this pigment wasn't used for anything practical like tanning hides. Its most likely use was on the human body itself, and possibly on the clothing being worn over it, as color, as marking, as a way to visually signal something about the person wearing it. If that's right, then almost from the moment we have solid evidence of clothing existing at all, we also have evidence that it was already being treated as a surface for meaning, not just a barrier against the weather. That question gets harder to answer at a very different site. In Denisova Cave, deep in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, archaeologists uncovered a small, polished bone needle with a tiny, deliberately drilled eye, dated to roughly 50,000 years ago, among the oldest sewing needles ever found. This wasn't someone draping a loose hide over their shoulders anymore. An eyed needle means fitted, tailored, layered clothing, garments sewn tightly enough to seal out air, built for a place where the winter genuinely could kill you within hours. This is the technology that let humans push into some of the coldest, most hostile environments on the planet, regions no unclothed human body could have survived in on its own. So here's the assumption most people carry into this topic, that clothing began purely as a practical response to cold, and that anything beyond warmth, style, identity, status was a much later, Modern edition layered on top of a basic survival tool. The evidence says the opposite. At Contrabandier's Cave, in a climate that didn't demand it, humans were already producing fur and leather clothing at the exact same time they were making the first personal ornaments in the archaeological record. And at Blombos Cave, around that same broad era. They were mixing pigments specifically to mark and decorate the body. Covering the body and decorating the body appear to be the same impulse, showing up together from the very beginning. The purely practical, purely survival version of clothing, the kind built for brutal Siberian winters, actually shows up later, at Denisova Cave. Tens of thousands of years after the first evidence of humans covering themselves for reasons that had nothing to do with the weather. This flips the usual story on its head. We like to imagine a clean, tidy progression, first survival, then, once the basics were handled, humans supposedly had the spare time and safety to start caring about how they looked. But the sites don't support that order at all. Identity and appearance weren't a reward humans earned after solving survival. They appear to have been part of the very first version of clothing, tangled up with practicality from day one, not added on afterward once things got easier. So let's put the timeline together, somewhere between 190,000 and 170,000 years ago. According to the genetic clock hidden inside clothing lice, humans were already wearing something regularly enough to create an entirely new parasite species. By 120,000 to 90,000 years ago, at Contrabandier's Cave in Morocco, people were producing fur and leather clothing in a mild climate, right alongside the earliest known personal ornaments. While roughly the same era at Blombos Cave in South Africa, people were mixing pigments specifically to decorate the body. And by around 50,000 years ago at Denisova Cave in Siberia, humans had developed sewn, tailored garments precise enough to survive genuinely lethal cold. You can still feel that original tangled up impulse every single time you get dressed. Even on a warm day, when covering your body has nothing to do with survival, you still choose what to wear based on how it makes you feel, how you want to be seen, what it says about you before you've said a word. That instinct isn't vanity bolted onto a practical habit. It's the original habit. Think about your own closet for a second. How much of it is actually there for temperature? And how much of it is there because of how it makes you feel walking into a room? Humans have never actually covered their bodies for one clean, simple reason. We've been doing both things, staying warm and being seen, at the exact same time, since before we had a way to write either reason down.